Before we begin, let me ask you something personal. Where in this vast world are you watching from? Whether you find yourself in bustling cities or quiet countryside, in the heat of summer or the embrace of winter, this story travels across all borders to reach your heart. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and leave a like. It helps us continue bringing these timeless tales to life, stories that remind us how love can transform even the most rigid of circumstances. What you're about to witness is a narrative of two souls bound by duty, separated by pride, and ultimately united by a love that refused to be denied. In an era when marriages were contracts and hearts were commodities, two strangers discovered that the greatest rebellion is choosing to love the one you were forced to marry. This is not merely a romance. It is a meditation on dignity, on the silent strength of those society overlooks, on the gardens that bloom in the most barren soil of human arrangement. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Charleston, South Carolina, May 1867, the era of Reconstruction. The magnolias were blooming the day Evangeline Whitmore became a transaction. Spring in Charleston arrived that year with particular cruelty, everything green and fragrant and alive, as if the war had never carved its name into the South's flesh. The city wore its restoration like a borrowed gown, beautiful from a distance, threadbare upon closer inspection. St. Michael's Episcopal Church stood as it always had, white steeple piercing the Carolina blue, bells tolling for weddings and funerals, with the same bronze indifference. Ava stood before the mirror in her mother's dressing room, watching hands that were not her own fasten pearl buttons down the length of her spine. 15 yards of Parisian silk, the color of old ivory, whispered against her skin. She had read in novels that brides feel beautiful on their wedding day. Hold still, her mother's voice cut through the magnolia-scented air drifting from the open window. Mrs. Whitmore's fingers were precise, mechanical. She had not met Eva's eyes in the mirror once during the entire ordeal of dressing. The girl, for at 21, Eva still felt more girl than woman, studied her own reflection with the detachment one might observe a painting in a gallery. Dark hair swept back from a face too pale, too serious, eyes the color of rain over the Ashley River. The dress transformed her into what she was meant to be, a symbol, a merger, a solution to financial ruin dressed in imported lace. Downstairs, she knew carriages were already arriving. The old guard of Charleston, those families whose names appeared in records dating back to the colony's founding, were gathering to witness the salvation of two dying dynasties. The Whitmores, whose fortune had evaporated in Confederate bonds, and whose lands lay fallow without the capital to replant. And the Ashfords, whose plantation had been ravaged by Sherman's march, whose debts accumulated like storm clouds on a summer horizon. A marriage, an arrangement, a business contract sealed with orange blossoms and episcopal vows. Eva had never met Thaddeus Ashford for more than a formal introduction at a Christmas gathering 2 years prior. He had returned from Oxford shortly after the war's end, a man shaped by English education and Confederate service into something harder than the South usually produced. She remembered his eyes that evening, dark, measuring, revealing nothing. He had asked her name, commented on the weather, and moved on to discuss cotton futures with her father. Now she would be Mrs. Ashford. The thought sat in her chest like a stone in still water. "Are your gloves?" her mother said, pressing white kid leather into Eva's hands. "And remember, a Charleston bride does not weep. We have our dignity, even if we have nothing else." Especially when we have nothing else, Eva thought, but did not say. The ceremony unfolded like a play she had watched from the audience. Eva moved through her lines, her responses whispered into the Reverend's patient pauses. Thaddeus stood beside her, tall and severe in his dark suit, speaking his vows with the inflection one might use to read a will. When he lifted her veil, his hands were steady. When he kissed her, a brief formal touch of lips, his eyes were somewhere else entirely. The congregation sang hymns. The organ played. Someone wept, not Eva, never Eva, and she wondered distantly who among them had tears to spare for a marriage that was nothing more than arithmetic. At the Ashford mansion on South Battery, the wedding breakfast transformed into an evening ball. 250 guests filled rooms that had once hosted parties for Confederate generals, now hosting the delicate dance of a society pretending it had not been broken. Crystal chandeliers held candles that cost more than most families earned in a month. The string quartet played Strauss as if Vienna had not waltzed on while the South bled. Eva danced the first waltz with her husband. His hand at her waist was proper, distant. They moved through the steps with the precision of strangers, following the same instruction manual. "You dance well," he said, because something had to be said. "I was taught by the best instructors," she replied, because that was the expected response. Around them, Charleston's elite whispered behind fans. Eva caught fragments. Quite a coup for the Whitmores at desperate times. At least the girl is handsome enough. When the dance ended, Thaddeus bowed, Eva curtsied, and they separated to their respective sides of the ballroom as if the music had been a brief, obligatory border crossing between two foreign countries. Near the punch bowl, Eva glimpsed a woman watching them, Miss Cordelia Beaumont, daughter of a textile family that had somehow emerged from the war wealthier than before. Beautiful in the way that sharpened knives are beautiful, all edges and glinting surfaces. The rumor, never confirmed, was that she and Thaddeus had been intended for each other before some unnamed scandal redirected his father's plans. Cordelia's smile was mercury and arsenic. The hours accumulated. Eva smiled until her face ached, accepted congratulations from people who knew what this marriage was, danced with elderly uncles who smelled of bourbon and tobacco and nostalgia for a world that no longer existed. Finally, mercifully, the guests departed. Carriages rolled away into the Charleston night, carrying with them the last pretense of celebration. The mansion settled into silence. Thaddeus was waiting in the hall outside what was now their shared suite of rooms. The candlelight carved his features into something stark, unreadable. Eva's hands trembled as she reached for the door handle, and she hated herself for the weakness. "Wait," he said. She turned. He looked at her for a long moment, this stranger who was now her husband, her legal master, the man who held every right over her person that law and church could grant. "I need you to understand something," Thaddeus said, his voice low. "I know what you are." Eva's breath caught. "I don't... an opportunist." The word fell between them like a stone into a well. "You and your father, you saw a chance to climb back into solvency, to salvage your family's name by attaching it to mine. I don't fault you for it. It's what anyone would do in your position. But I want no pretense between us." The accusation was a slap delivered with perfect courtesy. "You believe I wanted this?" Eva heard her own voice from a great distance, surprised by its steadiness. "You think I schemed to marry a man who looks at me as if I were a horse he purchased at auction? Didn't you?" "I have been many things, Mr. Ashford, but never dishonest." She lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of Whitmore pride into the gesture. "I was told I would marry you. I was not asked. I was not courted. I was informed that my family's survival depended on my compliance, and I complied because I am a dutiful daughter. If that makes me an opportunist in your eyes, then I accept the accusation. But do not assume I am pleased by it." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps. It vanished quickly. "You've never been courted?" The question was sharp, probing. "No, not even..." He stopped, recalculating. "You're telling me you've had no suitors, no secret attachments, nothing?" "Nothing," Eva said, and the emptiness of that single word seemed to fill the hall. "I have been groomed to be a wife, Mr. Ashford. I can play piano, speak French, embroider pillowcases, and pour tea without spilling. I have read every novel my governess deemed appropriate, and memorized every social grace required of my station. But I have never been courted. I have never even been kissed before today." The confession hung between them, intimate and terrible. Thaddeus was silent for so long that Eva thought he might not respond at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its edge. "I see." He turned toward his own door, separate from hers. "Then I think it best we maintain separate accommodations. We'll preserve appearances for society, but there's no need to compound one mistake with another. You consider marriage to me a mistake. I consider loveless marriage a mistake," he said without looking back. "We were forced into this by circumstance and our father's ambitions. There's no reason to pretend otherwise behind closed doors." He disappeared into his room, leaving Eva standing alone in the candlelit hallway, still wearing her wedding gown, still crowned with orange blossoms that were already beginning to wilt. She waited until she heard his door lock before allowing herself to cry. Charleston had gained a new wife that day, but Evangeline Whitmore had lost something she couldn't quite name, some gossamer hope she hadn't known she'd been carrying, now torn beyond repair. What neither of them knew, standing on opposite sides of their locked doors, was that love does not require permission to take root. It needs only time and proximity, and two hearts hollow enough to hear their own echoes in each other. But that discovery lay months away, through gardens of misunderstanding and fields of carefully maintained distance. May dissolved into June, and June surrendered to the heavy heat of July. The Ashford mansion became a map of avoidance. Two people learning the choreography of existing in parallel lines that never touched. Thaddeus slept in the east wing. Eva occupied the west. Between them stretched drawing rooms and parlors, a music room with a pianoforte that Eva played only when she knew he was away, a library whose leather-bound volumes became her only companions. They met for formal dinners served by servants who knew better than to acknowledge the frost settling over the mahogany table each evening. "The weather is warm," Eva would say. "Indeed," Thaddeus would reply, and silence would resume its reign. The servants moved through the house like ghosts through a graveyard, performing their duties with the quiet efficiency of those who had survived one war and understood that the battles fought in marriage were often just as devastating, if quieter. But there was Mama Delilah. She had been born enslaved on the Ashford plantation, 43 years before Lincoln's proclamation made the word free apply to her. Now 58, with silver threading through her black hair and wisdom carved into the lines around her eyes, she ran the household with gentle authority. She had raised Thaddeus after his mother's passing, and now she watched him repeat his father's mistakes with the resigned sadness of someone who had seen this story before. Eva found her one afternoon in the summer kitchen, preserving peaches in mason jars. The air was thick with sweetness and steam. "Mama Delilah," Eva began, then hesitated. The form of address had been the older woman's own suggestion, but Eva still felt presumptuous using it. "Yes, child? May I ask you something?" Delilah's hands continued their work, steady and sure. "You can ask me anything. Whether I answer depends on the question. What was she like? His mother?" The hands paused. Delilah looked up, searching Eva's face for something. Malice, perhaps, or idle curiosity. Finding neither, she smiled sadly. "Mrs. Margaret was sunshine in human form," she said softly. "Always laughing, always finding beauty in broken things. She used to walk through the gardens talking to flowers like they were old friends. When young Master Thaddeus was born, she sang to him every night, old English lullabies her own mother taught her. What happened to her? Typhoid. During the war." Delilah returned to her peaches, but her movements had slowed. She was nursing wounded soldiers at the field hospital the church had set up. Tending Confederate and Union boys alike didn't matter to her. They were all somebody's sons. She caught the fever from one of them. Lasted 3 days before the Lord took her home. Eva's throat tightened. "How old was Thaddeus?" 10 years old. Old enough to understand death, young enough to be destroyed by it. Delilah set down her knife, fixing Eva with a look that saw through pretense. His father never recovered. Cornelius loved that woman more than he loved God or money or honor. When she died, something in him died too. He sent young Thaddeus to Oxford, said it was for his education, but really he just couldn't bear to look at the boy anymore. Too much of Margaret in his face. And when Thaddeus returned, he came back a man, but a cold one. Fought in the wars last year, saw things no person should see, came home to a father who'd become a stranger, and a world that had ended while he was gone. Delilah reached across the table, her work-worn hand covering Eva's smooth one. "That's who you married, child. Fair man who learned early that love leads to loss and loss leads to—" She gestured at the space around them, the grand house filled with beautiful emptiness. This. That evening Eva found courage she didn't know she possessed. Instead of retiring to her rooms after dinner, she walked to the library where Thaddeus spent his nights with brandy and ledgers. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his features. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Eva said quickly. "I only wanted—" She noticed the book beside his account books. Thoreau. He followed her gaze, then almost smiled. Almost. "You know Walden?" "I know it's controversial in the South. Transcendentalism isn't exactly popular among Charleston's finest. And yet you've read it." "My governess believed women should have the same education as men, even if we're forbidden from using it." Eva moved closer, drawn by the first genuine interest she'd seen in his eyes. "I preferred Emerson to Thoreau, though. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. You're full of surprises." "Mrs. Ashford, as are you, Mr. Ashford." She gestured to the book. "A Confederate officer reading Northern philosophy? The war taught me that geography doesn't determine truth." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What else did this radical governess of yours teach you? That silence is sometimes louder than words. That dignity is the last thing they can take from you. That kindness is not weakness." She paused. "That we're all more than the roles society assigns us." Something shifted in the room, subtle as a candle flame bending in a draught, but unmistakable. "There's something I wanted to ask you," Eva continued, her heart beating against her ribs like a bird against cage bars. "The children on the plantation, the freed families, are any of them being educated?" Thaddeus's expression shuttered immediately. "Why?" "Because I'd like to teach them. Reading, writing, arithmetic, if you'd permit it." "You want to educate former slaves. I want to educate children. Eva corrected gently. Human beings whose futures depend on literacy in a world that's already against them. He was quiet for so long that Eva thought he'd refuse. Finally, my father would forbid it. I'm not asking your father. Their eyes met. In his, she saw calculation, reassessment, something that might have been respect. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he said. In the old smokehouse behind the kitchen garden. But if there's any trouble from the neighbors, any talk that damages the family name, there won't be. How can you be certain? Because I'll make sure it's not about charity or liberation or any of the things that frighten them, Eva said. I'll make it about children learning their letters. Nothing threatens Charleston society less than a woman engaging in appropriately feminine teaching activities. This time he definitely smiled. And so a small door opened between them. Not love, not yet, but something equally necessary. Recognition. The acknowledgement that the person you've been avoiding might contain unexpected depths. But recognition is a dangerous thing. Once you begin to see someone, it becomes nearly impossible to look away. August arrived with heat that turned the air to honey. Eva's small school flourished in the converted smokehouse, 12 children aged 6 to 14, sitting on plank benches, learning to shape letters that would shape their futures. She taught them more than reading. She taught them that knowledge was power, that dignity could not be legislated away, that their minds belonged to them in ways their bodies never had. The children called her Miss Eva, and when they finally connected sounds to symbols and read their first words, their joy was a kind of sunlight. Thaddeus watched sometimes from a distance. Eva would glimpse him standing in the shadow of the magnolia tree, observing. He never approached, never interfered. But he watched. The summer's rhythm established itself. Mornings in the garden, afternoons teaching, evenings at the piano, playing Chopin nocturne that spoke the emotions she couldn't voice, dinners that remained silent but somehow less hostile, nights alone, always alone, in rooms that smelled of magnolia and loneliness. Then came the Sunday everything shifted. St. Michael's Church held its regular communion service. Eva sat in the Ashford family pew, Thaddeus beside her, maintaining the appearance of marital unity for Charleston society. The Reverend spoke about grace and redemption. The congregation sang about peace. And Eva wept. She tried to contain it, to press her handkerchief to her eyes discreetly, but the tears came with a force that surprised her. Everything she'd been holding, the loneliness, the rejection from her own parents, who hadn't spoken to her since the wedding, the weight of being a commodity instead of a daughter, broke through her careful defenses. Thaddeus noticed. His hand found hers in the pew, squeezed once, gently. After the service, instead of joining the others for their social performance on the church steps, Eva fled to the mansion's garden. She found a bench beneath a crepe myrtle, its pink blooms raining petals like confetti for a celebration no one was having. She didn't hear him approach. Suddenly Thaddeus was there, sitting beside her, offering his own handkerchief since hers was soaked through. I apologize for the scene, Eva managed. You didn't make a scene. You cried quietly in church. If that's the worst scandal Charleston has to contend with, we're doing remarkably well. A laugh escaped her, watery and surprised. They sat in silence for a moment. Not the hostile silence of their dinners, but something softer. The garden hummed with late summer insects. Somewhere a mockingbird performed its repertoire of stolen songs. They haven't spoken to me, Eva said finally. My parents. Since the wedding! Mother sends notes through her maid about household matters, but she won't receive me. Father, her voice cracked. Father sold me and now he can't bear to look at what he's done. I'm sorry. Are you? She turned to face him. You were sold too in your way. Yes. He looked down at his hands and for the first time she saw him as something other than her captor in this arranged catastrophe. She saw him as someone equally trapped. My mother died when I was 10. Did Mama and Delilah tell you? She did. My father loved her so completely that her death broke something fundamental in him. He became obsessed with rebuilding the family fortune, the family name, as if wealth could fill the space she left behind. Thaddeus's voice was quiet, remembering. I was sent away. When I returned, he'd aged 20 years in 10, and he'd decided that marriage was a business transaction, nothing more. Love was dangerous. Love destroyed, and you believed him. I saw the evidence. A man hollowed out by love's loss, a plantation in ruins, a society built on the fantasy that certain people were property, while others were privileged. He looked at her then, really looked at her. But you don't believe that, do you? About love being dangerous. I believe love can hurt us, but I also believe the absence of love hurts more. Eva met his gaze. You remind me of Mr. Rochester, the Bronte character, dark, tormented, convinced he's beyond redemption. she smiled slightly, but ultimately capable of love even if he fights it. And you see yourself as Jane Eyre, the governess who tames the beast? I see myself as someone trying to survive in a world that views women as either possessions or problems. Ava's voice was steady now, tears dried. But yes, perhaps I see possibility where you see only inevitability. Thaddeus stood, offered his hand to help her rise. She took it, and for a moment they stood there in the garden, hands clasped, something unnamed passing between them. I have something for you, he said. That evening, he appeared at her door with a book wrapped in brown paper. She unwrapped it carefully. Leaves of Grass, she breathed. Whitman, this is scandalous. Consider it an apology for assuming the worst of you, for keeping you at arm's length when you deserved better. He shifted uncomfortably. I thought perhaps we might try something different. Different? Friendship, he said simply. We're bound together regardless. We might as well attempt to be friends. Ava looked down at the forbidden poetry in her hands, then back at this complicated man who was her husband, her stranger, her unexpected gift-giver. I'd like that, she said. Very much. And so, like seeds planted in unexpected soil, something began to grow. Not love, not yet, but its precursor, the willingness to see each other clearly without the armor of assumption and the shields of self-protection. In Charleston's gardens, magnolias bloomed and faded. In the Ashford mansion, two hearts began the slow, terrifying work of opening. October arrived wrapped in the soft grey light peculiar to Charleston autumns, when the oppressive heat finally breaks and the city remembers how to breathe. With it came the invitation, the St. Cecilia Society Ball, the pinnacle of Charleston's social season, the event by which every family's standing was measured and confirmed. Ava had never attended. The Whitmores' declining fortunes had excluded them from the inner circle, but now as Mrs. Thaddeus Ashford, she would make her formal debut among the old guard. The prospect terrified her. You'll be magnificent, Mama Delilah assured her, overseeing the fitting of Eva's new gown. The dressmaker had created something extraordinary, sapphire velvet that seemed to capture and hold light, with an off-shoulder design that was daring without being scandalous. The skirt required 6 crinolines to achieve its proper bell shape. I'll be an imposter, Eva murmured, studying her reflection. They'll know I don't belong. Child, half those people are imposters. Charleston society is built on the fiction that some blood is bluer than other blood, when we all bleed the same shade of red. Delilah adjusted Eva's necklace. The Ashford pearls, each one harvested from the Gulf and worth more than most people earned in a year. You hold your head high. You're Mrs. Ashford now. That name carried weight when this city was still a British colony. The evening of the ball, Thaddeus appeared at Eva's door in formal attire, black tailcoat, white waistcoat, silk cravat. He stopped when he saw her, and something crossed his face that Ava couldn't quite name. You're beautiful, he said, and it sounded like a confession. The Hibernian hall glowed with candlelight and ambition. 300 people filled the ballroom, the women in silks and satins that represented their families' last reserves of capital, the men in uniforms they could no longer wear or suits they'd had made before the war. An orchestra played on the gallery, and the air smelled of perfume, pomade, and barely concealed desperation. Eva entered on Thaddeus's arm, feeling every eye turn toward them. Mrs. Ashford, matrons murmured, nodding with careful calibration, warm enough to acknowledge her status, cool enough to remind her of her origins. They navigated through the social topography. The Middletons, the Pinckneys, the Retts, families whose names were woven into Carolina history. Eva curtsied, smiled, spoke in French when addressed in French, quoted appropriately from acceptable literature, and felt like she was performing a play in a language she'd only half learned. Then Cordelia Beaumont glided into their path. Mr. Ashford, she purred, extending her hand for him to kiss. How lovely to see you. And this must be your bride. The pause before bride was calculated, sharp as a hidden blade. Miss Beaumont, Thaddeus said coolly. May I present my wife, Mrs. Evangeline Ashford? Charming. Cordelia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Tell me, dear, how are you finding Charleston society? It must be quite different from... What was it? Your father was in trade, wasn't he? Eva felt the insult land. Around them, conversations paused, ears tuning to potential scandal. My father, Eva said clearly in French, understood that true nobility lies not in inherited names but in cultivated virtue. As Rousseau observed, man is born free and everywhere he is in chains, including chains of our own vanity and pretense. She delivered the words with perfect Parisian accent, with the kind of education money couldn't buy, with a grace that made Cordelia's attack look exactly like what it was, petty jealousy, dressed as social commentary. Several nearby matrons hid smiles behind fans. Thaddeus's hand tightened on her arm. In pride, she realized, not anger. "If you'll excuse us, Miss Beaumont," he said, "I believe they're playing a Viennese waltz, and I've been looking forward to dancing with my wife." He led Eva onto the floor as the orchestra swelled into a Strauss composition. Other couples parted to make room. Thaddeus's hand found her waist. Hers rested on his shoulder, and they began to move. This was nothing like their wedding waltz, that cold performative circuit around the floor. This was conversation in motion. Thaddeus led with confidence, and Eva followed as if they'd been practicing for years. The music lifted them, carried them, and for 3 minutes the entire ballroom watched as the Ashfords became what they'd been pretending to be, a matched pair, moving in perfect synchronization. "That was masterfully done," Thaddeus murmured as they turned. "The French was inspired. I wasn't about to let her make me feel small." "You could never be small." His eyes held hers. "You're magnificent when you're defending yourself. I was defending both of us." "I know." The music swelled toward its conclusion. "That's what makes it remarkable." When the waltz ended, he didn't release her immediately. They stood there, breathing together, and Eva felt her heart doing something dangerous, something she'd been trying to prevent. The carriage ride home was quiet, but it was the quiet of two people afraid to speak for fear of saying too much. Charleston passed by the windows, gaslit streets, palmetto trees casting long shadows, the Cooper River reflecting moonlight like scattered pearls. "Eva," Thaddeus said finally as they approached the mansion. "Yes, I need to tell you something." He turned to face her in the dim carriage. "When I first saw you tonight, when you came down those stairs in that blue gown," he stopped, searching for words. "I've been telling myself that our arrangement is purely practical, that I feel nothing beyond respect and perhaps friendship." Eva's breath caught. "But I think I've been lying to myself." His voice was low, almost angry, but the anger was directed inward. "I find myself thinking about you when you're not there, listening for your piano playing in the evenings, creating excuses to walk past the smokehouse when you're teaching. And tonight, watching you face down Cordelia Beaumont with such grace and strength. Thaddeus, I'm developing feelings that are decidedly improper for an arranged marriage," he said. "And I thought you should know." The carriage had stopped. They sat in darkness, the gaslight from the street not quite reaching them, suspended in a moment that felt like standing at the edge of something vast. "They're not improper," Eva whispered. "Not if they're reciprocated." His eyes widened slightly. "Are they?" "I believe so." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I've been trying very hard not to, but you make it difficult. When you smile at something I say. When I find books left on my music stand that you thought I'd enjoy. When you defended my school even though it might cause trouble with your father." "Eva." He reached for her hand, held it between both of his. "If we proceed down this path, there's no pretending anymore. No maintaining separate rooms and separate lives. I know. We'll be actually married. In every sense." "I know," she said again, and this time she was smiling. The carriage door opened. Thaddeus stepped out, then turned to help her down. But instead of releasing her hand, he lifted it to his lips, kissing her gloved knuckles with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Then let us begin again," he said softly. Not as strangers forced together, but as two people choosing each other. In the distance, the St. Michael's bells tolled midnight. Behind them, Charleston slept, unaware that in one of its finest houses, a marriage was finally beginning. November transformed the Low Country into something almost northern, cool enough for fires in the evening, for shawls worn over dinner dresses, for the romance of watching rain against window panes while safe inside. Eva and Thaddeus existed in a state of careful discovery. Dinners became conversations. Evenings in the library became debates about philosophy, literature, the future of the South. They still maintained separate bedrooms, but the doors between them remained unlocked, and sometimes often Thaddeus would tap softly and ask if he might read aloud to her before sleep. He introduced her to horseback riding. She was terrified at first, but he was patient, holding the mare steady while Eva learned to find her seat, to communicate with the animal through subtle shifts of weight and gentle pressure. "You're a natural," he said one afternoon as they walked their horses along the edge of the cotton fields. "I'm terrified. Terror and ability aren't mutually exclusive." He glanced at her, sunlight catching in his dark hair. "You've been terrified since the day we met, and you've handled everything with more grace than I deserve." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the November wind carrying the scent of turned earth and possibility. "Thaddeus," Eva said eventually, "I need to tell you about something your father is planning." He tensed. "What?" "He wants to evict the sharecropper families." The 35 families working the western acreage. He's been approached by speculators from the north who want to buy the land. How do you know this? I overheard him discussing it with his lawyer. In the library. They didn't know I was in the music room. Thaddeus was silent, his jaw working. Finally, those families have nowhere else to go. They were slaves here before the war. This is the only home they've ever known. I know. Eva paused. I might have an idea if you're willing to listen. Tell me. Over the next hour, as they rode and then returned to the house, Eva outlined her proposal. Instead of traditional sharecropping where the workers paid rent and were always in debt, what if the Ashfords established a cooperative? The families would work the land, share in the profits, receive education for their children, and have security of tenure. It's radical, Thaddeus said, but he wasn't dismissing it. It's profitable, Eva countered. People work harder when they have a stake in the outcome, when they know their children will benefit from their labor. My father will never agree. Then we don't ask him. The land you inherited from your mother, the 200 acres in Beaufort County, that's yours legally. Start the cooperative there. Prove it works. Then expand. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about many things, she met his gaze, including the fact that we have resources and position and the ability to do something meaningful with both. Charleston society might condemn us, but what has Charleston society ever done besides preserve its own comfort? That evening, after dinner, Thaddeus appeared at her door with a violin case. I didn't know you played, Eva said, surprised. I learned at Oxford. Haven't touched it in years. He looked almost embarrassed. I thought, would you accompany me? On the piano, they spent the next 2 hours making music together, halting at first, then finding their rhythm. Eva played Schumann, Thaddeus improvised harmony, and somewhere in the interplay of piano and violin, something shifted between them. Some final wall dissolved. When the last note faded, Thaddeus set down the violin and crossed to where Eva sat at the piano bench. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to listen carefully, because I've never said these words to anyone. Eva's hands stilled on the keys. I believe I have fallen in love with you, Mrs. Ashford. The world seemed to hold its breath. I fought it, he continued. I told myself it was impossible, that we were trapped in an arrangement, that love would only complicate what should be simple. But watching you teach those children, hearing you speak French to defend our honor, seeing how you think about making the world better, instead of just preserving what was, his voice roughened. How could I not love you? Tears spilled down Eva's cheeks, but she was smiling. And I with you, Mr. Ashford. I've been falling for weeks now, and I stopped fighting it the night of the bull when I realized that choice matters more than circumstances. We didn't choose this marriage initially, but we can choose it now. We can choose each other. He pulled her to her feet, and this time when he kissed her there was nothing formal or distant about it. This was a claiming, a promise, a door opening onto a future they would build together. Come with me, he said when they finally broke apart. He led her to his bedroom, and for the first time since their wedding night, Eva crossed that threshold not as an obligation but as a choice. Thaddeus was gentle, patient, showing her what love could be when coupled with desire, when two people decided that their bodies could speak what words struggled to express. Afterward, lying in the darkness with his heartbeat beneath her ear, Eva whispered, "We married by contract, but we'll love by choice. Always by choice." Thaddeus agreed, his arms tightening around her. From this moment forward, always by choice. Outside, November rain began to fall, washing Charleston clean, baptizing the world in the soft darkness. Inside, two people who had been strangers, then adversaries, then friends, finally became what they were always meant to be, lovers who had chosen each other against all logic, despite every obstacle through the simple, radical act of seeing clearly. But love once chosen must be protected. And in Charleston, there were those who remembered what Thaddeus had been before Eva, who would not easily forgive the happiness they'd found. December brought the kind of weather that made low-country natives smile. Crisp mornings that warmed to gentle afternoons, air that smelled of wood smoke and possibility. And with it came Thaddeus's suggestion, let's leave Charleston for a while, have the honeymoon we never got. They traveled by private railcar to Beaufort County, to the magnolia plantation that had been his mother's dowry. The main house was smaller than the Charleston mansion, built in the Georgian style with wide piazzas designed to catch river breezes. The gardens were famous, acres of azaleas and camellias, ancient oaks wrapped in Spanish moss, and the magnolias that gave the place its name. My mother loved it here, Thaddeus said as their carriage approached down a tunnel of live oaks. She said Charleston was beautiful but constrained. Here she could breathe. Eva understood the moment she stepped onto the grounds. There was a wildness here that the city lacked, a sense that nature had agreed to be decorative, but refused to be tamed completely. They spent their days in luxurious idleness, long breakfasts on the piazza, watching egrets fish in the river, walks through the gardens where Thaddeus showed her secret paths from his childhood, evenings reading aloud to each other from books they'd brought, Dickens, George Eliot, the poetry Eva loved. "There's something I want to show you," Thaddeus said one afternoon, leading her away from the formal gardens. They walked for perhaps 20 minutes, following a barely visible trail through palmetto undergrowth until they emerged at a small river inlet. The water was dark as tea, stained by tannins from the swamp. A weathered dock extended into the current, and on it sat an old rowboat, sun-bleached and listing slightly. "This was our place," Thaddeus said softly. "Mother's and mine. Before I was sent away, before the war, before everything changed, she'd bring me here and we'd fish, or sometimes just sit and watch the river move. She said moving water was God's way of reminding us that nothing stays the same. That change is natural as breathing." Eva watched his profile, saw the grief that still lived there, even after 18 years. "She would have liked you," he continued. "Would have loved your mind, your strength, the way you see possibilities instead of obstacles." He turned to face Eva. "I wish you could have known her." "Tell me about her," Eva said. "Everything you remember." So they sat on the dock, feet dangling over the water, and Thaddeus spoke about his mother's laugh that sounded like wind chimes, about how she'd read to him every night, voices for every character, about her insistence that all people deserve dignity, which scandalized Charleston society even before the war, about how she'd cried when he was sent to England, but had written him letters every week without fail until the fever took her. "I still have them," he said. "Every letter." She wrote about the weather, the garden, books she was reading, mundane things. But reading them now, I can hear her voice. "May I read them someday?" "I'd like that." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small leather case. "I've carried this since the day she died." Inside was a daguerreotype, the old photography technology that captured images on silver-plated copper. The woman in the image was young, maybe 30, with Thaddeus's dark eyes and a smile that managed to reach through decades of chemicals and emulsion to touch Eva's heart. "She's beautiful," Eva whispered. "She was everything." He closed the case gently, reverently. "And I spent so many years angry at her for leaving, angry at my father for sending me away, angry at the world for continuing when she was gone. I think," his voice caught, "I think I've been afraid to love anyone else because losing her hurt so much." Eva took his hand, laced their fingers together. "I can't promise I'll never leave you. None of us can promise that, but I can promise that I'll love you while I'm here, fully, without reservation. And if something happens to me, I want you to remember that our love was worth the risk." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. They sat like that for a long time, the river moving past them, carrying away old griefs and making space for new hopes. That evening, Thaddeus surprised her again. He'd arranged a private ceremony in the plantation's small chapel, just them, the local minister, and Mama and Delilah, who'd traveled from Charleston for the occasion. "I want to marry you again," Thaddeus said. "Not because our fathers arranged it, not for merging properties or solving financial problems. I want to marry you because I choose you, because I love you, because I want God and witnesses to know that this is real." The ceremony was simple. No silk gowns or hundreds of guests. Eva wore a dress of cream linen. Thaddeus had found wildflowers growing near the river and woven them into a crown for her hair. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promises about choosing each other daily, about building a future on love rather than contract. When the minister pronounced them married, Thaddeus kissed her with such tenderness that Mama and Delilah wept openly. "Now you're truly husband and wife," she said afterward, embracing them both. "The first wedding was legal. This one is holy." That night, in the big bed in the plantation's master suite, with moonlight streaming through the windows and the sound of the river in the distance, Thaddeus and Eva consummated their second marriage with a depth of feeling that their first union had lacked. "I love you," Eva whispered against his skin again and again, as if the words were a spell she was casting. "And I you," he replied with equal reverence. Outside, the magnolias held their blooms tight against the December chill, waiting for spring. Inside, two people created their own season of flowering, their own warm country, where the past couldn't reach and the future waited like a gift they'd give each other. Day by day, January returned them to Charleston, but they were different people than those who'd left. Love had gentled Thaddeus's edges, strengthened Eva's confidence. The household staff noticed, impossible not to when Mr. Ashford smiled more in a week than he had in the previous 6 months, when Mrs. Ashford's piano playing took on a joyful complexity. The change manifested in small daily gestures. Thaddeus bringing Eva coffee in bed. Eva leaving notes in his account books, quotes from poetry, small drawings, observations about the day. Their separate bedrooms became a fiction maintained only for propriety's sake. Most nights, they fell asleep tangled together in Thaddeus's larger bed. Then, in late January, Eva noticed the absence of something she'd previously taken for granted. She consulted with Maman Delilah first, in the privacy of the still room where herbs hung drying from the rafters. "How late?" Delilah asked, her experienced hands continuing to grind chamomile. 6 weeks, perhaps 7. Delilah set down her mortar and pestle, really looking at Eva for the first time. "Any sickness in the mornings?" "Some, and I'm exhausted by mid-afternoon, which isn't like me." A slow smile spread across Delilah's face. "Lord have mercy. We are going to have a baby in this house." Dr. Pemberton confirmed it 2 days later. He was an elderly physician who'd delivered half of Charleston's children and had the discretion of a priest. "About 6 weeks along," he said, clicking his bag shut. "You're healthy, young, strong. I see no reason why this shouldn't be a perfectly normal pregnancy. Though I'll want to see you monthly until the 7th month, then weekly after that." Eva waited until evening to tell Thaddeus. She'd planned an elaborate revelation, but when he came in from riding and smiled at her, that new smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, the words tumbled out. "I'm pregnant." He froze. "You're what?" Pregnant. With child. Due, Dr. Pemberton estimates, in early August." For a moment, Thaddeus didn't move. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides, swept her into his arms and spun her around with a whoop of joy that brought servants running to see what catastrophe had occurred. "We're having a baby," he announced to the assembled staff, still holding Eva off the ground. "A child, an Ashford." Maman Delilah wiped her eyes. The maids giggled. Even the usually stoic butler allowed himself a smile. The next months unfolded in a haze of preparation and tender care. Thaddeus became impossibly protective, insisting Eva rest more, worry less. He brought in an obstetrician from Boston, Dr. Sarah Blackwell, one of the first women to graduate from medical school, whose presence in a Charleston household raised eyebrows but whose expertise was undeniable. "You're doing wonderfully," Dr. Blackwell assured Eva during her visits. "The nausea will pass soon. For now, eat what appeals to you, rest when you're tired, and ignore every piece of unsolicited advice you receive, and you will receive plenty." The nursery was established in the room adjoining their bedroom. Thaddeus commissioned a cradle from a master craftsman in Savannah, mahogany carved with magnolias and oaks, a piece that would become an heirloom. Eva sewed tiny gowns with help from the household seamstresses, embroidering each one with delicate flowers. "If it's a boy," Thaddeus said one evening, his hand resting on Eva's still flat stomach, "I'd like to name him Elijah. It was my grandfather's name." "Elijah Ashford," Eva tested. "It sounds strong, noble. And if it's a girl?" "Margaret," Eva said softly. "After your mother." Thaddeus's eyes filled with tears. He kissed Eva's forehead, then her lips, then the place where their child grew. "You're giving me everything I thought I'd lost forever. Family, hope, a future worth living." As winter gave way to spring, Eva's body changed. The morning sickness faded, replaced by an energy that surprised her. Her students noticed. Miss Eva had a glow about her, they said, a happiness that made even the hardest lessons feel like gifts. Charleston society noticed too. The announcement in the newspaper's social column generated the appropriate round of congratulations. Matrons sent calling cards and tiny gifts. Miss Cordelia Beaumont notably sent nothing, but then she'd retreated from society after the Assembly Ball incident, her pride too damaged to risk further humiliation. By May, Eva was visibly pregnant, and the household revolved around her comfort. Maman Delilah prepared special teas to ease swelling. Dr. Blackwell prescribed gentle walks. Thaddeus read to her every evening, Shakespeare mostly, the comedies rather than tragedies, filling their rooms with laughter instead of sorrow. "I'm happy," Eva said one night, the statement emerging with a kind of wonder. "Are you surprised?" "Completely." She turned to face him in the lamplight. 6 months ago I was a commodity, a solution to financial problems. And now I'm carrying your child, building a life I never imagined possible." "We're building it together," Thaddeus corrected. "You and me and this little one." He placed his hand over hers on her rounded belly. "Our family." But happiness, like all things in Charleston, existed within a delicate social ecosystem, and there were those who remembered past slights, old jealousies, buried resentments. There were those who believed the Ashfords had risen too far, too fast, who felt that a marriage begun in contract should not be allowed to transform into genuine love. There were those who would do anything to see that love destroyed, and they were already planning. April arrived with the scent of Confederate jasmine sweetening the air, and with it came the first whispers of trouble. Colonel Phineas Blackwood was not a Southerner. He'd arrived in Charleston 6 months after Appomattox, a carpetbagger with northern capital and southern ambitions. He bought distressed properties, manipulated debts, and grew wealthy on the carcass of the Confederacy. Among certain sets he was tolerated for his money. Among others, he was despised for his origins and methods. What few people knew was that he'd fixed his attention on Ashford Holdings. "The old man's made mistakes," he said to his lawyer over brandy in his King Street townhouse, "borrowed against future cotton yields that'll never materialize. The son's distracted with his pregnant wife and his little school for freedmen. Now's the time to call in the notes." "It would ruin them," the lawyer observed. "That's the idea." Blackwood swirled his drink, watching firelight through amber liquid. "The plantation's worth 3 times what they owe, but they can't access that capital quickly. They'll have to sell at fire sale prices. To me." What he didn't mention was his silent partner in this scheme, Miss Cordelia Beaumont, whose wounded pride sought expression in revenge. They met in secret, improper, scandalous, but both were beyond caring about Charleston's approval. "I'll help you," Cordelia said, "if you promise me one thing." "What's that?" "I want to see her humiliated. That little upstart who thinks she can lecture society in French, who thinks she's better than me because Thaddeus chose her." Cordelia's beautiful face twisted. "I want her reputation destroyed." "What did you have in mind?" She smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Over the following weeks, a careful campaign of destruction was mounted. It began with forged letters, supposedly written by Eva before her marriage, to a mysterious suitor. The handwriting was expertly copied from samples Cordelia had obtained. The content was damning: passionate declarations of love, promises to marry, suggestions of improper intimacy. Then came the miniature portrait, a small painting of a handsome man unknown to Charleston society, discovered accidentally in Eva's music room by a maid who'd been bribed for her cooperation. Finally, there was testimony. A woman claiming to have been Eva's maid before her marriage, swearing she'd arranged secret meetings between Miss Eva and her lover. The woman was lying, paid handsomely to play her part, but her story had the ring of plausibility. The evidence was assembled, then delivered to Thaddeus anonymously. A package left at his office in the financial district, containing the letters, the miniature, and an affidavit from the supposed maid. He opened it during a late afternoon in mid-April, when Eva was 6 months pregnant and glowing with the kind of contentment that made the household feel like a different world from the war-torn one they'd known. Thaddeus read the letters once, twice, 3 times. His hands shook. The handwriting looked like Eva's, the same elegant script, the same flourishes. The miniature showed a man he'd never seen. And the testimony. Old doubts, old wounds, old voices rose up. His father's cynicism. Southern belles are masters of deception. His own first accusations to Eva. "I know what you are. An opportunist." He tried to reason past it. Eva had been nothing but honest with him. She'd shown him only love and faithfulness. But the evidence was there, tangible, damning. That evening he was cold at dinner. Eva noticed immediately. "Is something wrong?" "No." The lie tasted like ash. "Thaddeus, I know you. Something's troubling you." He wanted to throw the accusations at her, to demand explanations. But she was 6 months pregnant with their child. The doctor had warned about avoiding stress. And part of him, a larger part than he wanted to admit, was terrified of what she might say if confronted. So he said nothing. And the silence between them grew. Eva felt it like a physical thing. The withdrawal of his affection, the way he avoided meeting her eyes, the careful distance he maintained. She'd done nothing wrong, but some unnamed offense had created a gulf between them. It came to a head on a Sunday morning at St. Philip's Church. Cordelia Beaumont, emboldened by the success of her scheme, approached Eva after the service. She was all false sympathy and poisoned kindness. "My dear Mrs. Ashford," she cooed, loud enough for nearby parishioners to hear, "you look tired. The pregnancy must be difficult. Or perhaps," she paused delicately, "perhaps it's the weight of conscience. I imagine deception becomes heavier as one's condition becomes more evident." Eva felt the world tilt. "I don't know what you mean, don't you?" Cordelia's smile was venomous. "I suppose some women are so practiced at falsehood that they forget what truth looks like. One wonders about paternity in such cases." The implication was clear, brutal, designed to wound. Eva's vision grayed at the edges. The church's heat, the stays of her maternity dress, the horrified gasps of the women around them, it all pressed in. She felt something give way inside her, a flooding warmth that terrified her. She collapsed. Thaddeus, standing with a group of men discussing cotton prices, heard the commotion. He turned to see his wife crumpling to the floor, blood beginning to stain her skirts, and for a moment the world stopped. "Ava!" He ran to her, gathered her in his arms. "Someone get Dr. Blackwell, now!" She was conscious, but barely. Tears streaked her face. "I didn't... Whatever you think, whatever someone told you, I didn't..." "Hush," he said, though his own heart was breaking. "Don't speak. Just hold on." The doctor arrived within 30 minutes. Ava was transported to the mansion and confined to bed. Dr. Blackwell's examination was thorough and grim. "She's had a threatened miscarriage. The baby's still alive, but barely. She must have complete bed rest. No movement, no stress, no upsets of any kind. If she's careful, we might save the child. But the next few weeks are critical." That night, Eva made a decision. For the sake of her honor, for the sake of her unborn child, for the sake of a truth she couldn't prove against lies that looked so convincing, she would remove herself from the situation entirely. "I want to go to my parents' house," she told Mama Delilah, who alone was allowed into her room. "Child, that's not wise. It's necessary. Something has turned Thaddeus against me. I don't know what, but I won't stay where I'm not trusted. I won't raise my child in a house where his father believes his mother to be a liar." The next morning, over Thaddeus's protests and the doctor's concerns, Ava was transported by carriage to the Whitmore house on Trad Street. Her parents received her coldly. Their prodigal daughter returned in shame, exactly as they'd predicted. And in the Ashford mansion, Thaddeus was left alone with his doubts, his evidence, and the terrible question, what if I've destroyed everything over lies? The Whitmore house on Trad Street was a monument to faded grandeur. The paint was peeling, the garden overgrown. Ava's parents inhabited it like ghosts haunting their own decline, performing the rituals of aristocracy in increasingly threadbare clothes. They put Ava in her old childhood room, a small space on the second floor that smelled of mildew and regret. The bed was narrow, the furnishings sparse. Her mother delivered instructions through the closed door. "You'll take your meals in your room. We can't have the neighbors seeing you in this condition, not after the scandal. The doctor will visit twice daily. You're to remain absolutely still." Eva lay in the narrow bed, hands on her belly where their child, hers and Thaddeus's, struggled to survive. She prayed more in those weeks than she had in her entire life. Not the rote prayers of her Anglican upbringing, but desperate pleas. Please let the baby live. Please let him understand. Please let love be stronger than lies. Across town, the Ashford mansion echoed with absence. Thaddeus walked its halls like a man searching for something he'd lost and couldn't name. He slept when he slept at all, in Eva's room, surrounded by her scent, her books, the tiny gowns she'd embroidered for their child. He drank too much. Kentucky bourbon, the kind that burned going down and numbed nothing at all. Mama and Delilah found him one evening in the music room, Eva's piano silent, an empty bottle beside him. "You're making yourself sick," she said bluntly. "Good. That's not what Mrs. Eva would want." "Mrs. Eva," he said bitterly, "is evidently not who I thought she was." Delilah was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled a chair close and sat with the familiarity of someone who'd earned the right. "Let me tell you something, young master. I've raised you since you were 10 years old. I loved your mother like my own sister. And I've watched you make every mistake your father made, only faster. I have evidence. Evidence can be manufactured. Love can't." She leaned forward. "I've seen that girl cry herself to sleep, praying for you when you were too stubborn to speak to her kindly. I've watched her embroider your initials on handkerchiefs like some lovesick schoolgirl. I've heard her tell me, with her whole heart shining in her eyes, that she never knew love could feel like what she feels for you." Thaddeus's throat tightened. "A scheming woman doesn't cry real tears," Delilah continued. "And I've seen this child cry until she had nothing left. A woman playing a part doesn't teach freedmen's children for no pay and no recognition. She doesn't stand up to society matrons to defend her husband's honor. She doesn't," her voice broke. "She doesn't risk her life and her baby's life to preserve her dignity when she could just as easily lie and be believed. The evidence, damn your evidence!" Delilah's curse shocked him. She never swore. "I'm talking about what I've seen with my own eyes, what I know in my bones. That girl loves you like your mother loved your father, true and deep and forever, and you're throwing it away because you're afraid." "Afraid?" "Terrified," she corrected. "Scared that if you love her fully, if you trust her completely, she'll be taken from you like your mother was. So you're looking for reasons to push her away, to prove that love isn't real, that it's all just schemes and lies and self-interest. The words landed like blows. "I don't—" Thaddeus started, then stopped, because she was right. Some part of him had been waiting for Eva to betray him, to prove his father's cynicism correct, to confirm that love was dangerous and loss was inevitable. "What have I done?" he whispered. "You've made a mistake," Delilah said, more gently now, "but mistakes can be fixed. If you're man enough to admit you were wrong." For the next week, Thaddeus began his own investigation. He examined the letters more carefully, noticed inconsistencies in the ink, the paper. He hired a handwriting expert who confirmed they were skilled forgeries. He tracked down the supposed maid and found her in a boarding house near the docks, paid her to tell the truth, that she'd never worked for the Whitmores, that she'd been hired to lie. Piece by piece, the conspiracy unraveled. Colonel Blackwood, Miss Cordelia Beaumont, a scheme designed to destroy his marriage, ruin his wife's reputation, and ultimately acquire Ashford property at cut-rate prices. The rage that filled Thaddeus was cold, calculated and absolute. But first, before justice, before revenge, he had to do something much harder. He had to beg forgiveness. Yes, on a warm evening in early June, Thaddeus appeared at the Whitmore house on Trad Street. He was shown into the parlor by a servant who looked nervous. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore received him with the warmth of marble statues. "Mr. Ashford," Eva's father said icily, "I'm surprised you'd show your face here. I need to see my wife. Your wife is unwell thanks to the stress you've caused her. The doctor says—" "I don't care what the doctor says. I'm seeing her." Thaddeus straightened to his full height, years of aristocratic breeding asserting themselves. "She's my wife. I have every legal right. You can allow me upstairs voluntarily, or I can invoke those rights more forcefully. Choose." Mrs. Whitmore gasped at the audacity. But Mr. Whitmore, reading the determination in Thaddeus's eyes, grudgingly nodded. 10 minutes. And if she becomes distressed, you leave immediately." Thaddeus climbed the stairs, each step feeling like walking toward judgment. He knocked softly on what the maid indicated was Eva's door. "Come in," her voice called, weak but clear. He entered. The room was small, shabby, nothing like the beautiful suite she'd occupied in his home. Eva lay in a narrow bed, 7 months pregnant, pale as the sheets beneath her. Her hair was loose, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something worse, resignation. She looked at him without speaking. "Eva," he began, and his voice broke on her name. "I've come to—" He stopped, started again. "I need to tell you something." "Let me guess," she said, and there was steel beneath the weakness. "You've discovered the truth, that I was innocent, that the evidence was fabricated. Yes, and now you're here to apologize, to ask me to return home, to forgive you for believing lies over the woman who loves you." "Yes," he whispered. She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't respond. When she did, her words cut deeper than any knife. "For the dishonor you bestowed upon me, for the trust you withdrew, for the fact that you believed I could betray you even while carrying your child." Her voice broke, but she continued. "I don't know if I can forgive that. I don't know if I can return to a marriage where my husband's faith in me is so fragile that a few forged letters can destroy it. I was wrong. You were cruel." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I gave you everything. My heart, my body, my future. I chose you every day, even when you were cold to me, even when society whispered about my origins. And the moment you were tested, you believed the worst." Thaddeus fell to his knees beside the bed. I know, and I have no excuse except fear. Fear of losing you like I lost my mother. Fear that love was too good to be real. I was wrong, Ava. Completely, unforgivably wrong." She closed her eyes. Beneath her hands, their child moved. Thaddeus could see the ripple across her belly, life persisting despite everything. "Tell me what to do," he said. "Tell me how to make this right." "I don't know if you can." They sat in painful silence, husband and wife, lovers torn apart by lies, two people who'd found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and nearly lost everything to fear and pride. Outside, Charleston prepared for summer. Magnolias dropped their heavy blooms. The air grew thick with heat and anticipation. And in the small room on Trad Street, a woman and a man faced the hardest question love ever asks. Can forgiveness be larger than hurt? Can trust be rebuilt from broken pieces? The answer would determine not just their future, but the future of the child who waited, innocent and unknowing, to be born into whatever world they created. Judge Silas Montgomery was a man who valued justice above all things, a quality that had made him unpopular during Reconstruction, but had also earned him respect from those who prized honor over expedience. He was also Thaddeus's godfather, a friend of his late mother, someone who'd watched the boy grow into a complicated man. When Thaddeus came to him with the forged letters and a request for help, the judge didn't hesitate. "I'll get to the bottom of this," he promised, "even if I have to hire every Pinkerton detective between here and New York." And he did. Within 2 weeks, the conspiracy was laid bare. The Pinkerton agent, a methodical man named Harrison Webb, traced the forgeries to a small print shop that specialized in duplicating documents for lawyers. The proprietor, when pressed, admitted he'd been paid handsomely to create the letters, though he claimed not to know who'd hired him. But money leaves a trail, and Webb followed it. The miniature painting? Commissioned from an artist known for producing fake heirlooms for social climbers. The maid's testimony? A woman with a history of perjury, easily broken when threatened with prosecution. Hand behind it all, Colonel Phineas Blackwood, with financial records showing payments to each participant in the scheme. Miss Cordelia Beaumont's involvement was harder to prove definitively, but her intimate knowledge of Eva's handwriting and household routines pointed clearly to her complicity. Judge Montgomery assembled the evidence with the precision of a master architect. Then he called Thaddeus to his chambers. "You'll want to see this," he said, spreading documents across his desk. "Everything, the forgeries, the bribes, the entire conspiracy, enough to bring charges against Blackwood and ruin Miss Beaumont's reputation permanently." Thaddeus studied the papers, fury building with each revelation. "I'll destroy them." "You will," the judge agreed. "But first you have a more important task." "What's that?" "Winning back your wife." That evening, Thaddeus returned to Trad Street. This time he didn't ask permission. He walked past the butler, ignored Mrs. Whitmore's protests, and climbed directly to Eva's room. She looked up when he entered, surprise and wariness warring in her expression. "I have something to show you," Thaddeus said, setting the folder of evidence on the small table beside her bed. "Everything. Every lie they told, every forgery they created, every person they bribed. And I want you to understand something. This isn't an excuse. Nothing excuses what I believed about you, but you deserve to know the truth." Eva opened the folder with trembling hands. As she read, her face shifted through emotions, shock, anger, hurt, and finally a kind of exhausted vindication. "Cordelia," she whispered, "and a man I've never even met. They wanted to destroy us, to take our land, our happiness, our future." Thaddeus knelt beside her bed, taking her hand gently. "And I let them. I let old wounds and old fears turn me into my father, suspicious, cold, unable to trust the best thing that ever happened to me. Thaddeus, I love you, Evangeline. I loved you on our second wedding day. I loved you every moment of these past months, and I loved you even when I was too afraid and stupid to trust that love. You are the best person I've ever known, and I failed you in every way a husband can fail his wife." Tears streamed down Eva's face. "You hurt me so deeply." "I know. I don't know how to trust you again." "Then let me show you." He held her gaze, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Let me spend every day for the rest of our lives proving that I can be the man you deserve, that I can be worthy of you." Eva was quiet, her free hand resting on her belly where their son, they'd started calling the baby Elijah in their hearts, though they didn't yet know, kicked and turned. "There are conditions," she said finally. "Anything. You will stand before Charleston society and declare my innocence publicly. You will face Colonel Blackwood and demand satisfaction for this insult to my honor. You will show everyone who doubted me that you believe in me absolutely. Done. And you will never," her voice broke, "you will never doubt me again. Not in your heart, not in your worst moments, not when fear whispers that love isn't real. You will choose to trust me every day the way I've chosen to love you. I swear it. On my mother's memory, on our child's future, on everything I hold sacred, I swear it." Outside the window, evening was falling. Somewhere in Charleston, church bells rang for vespers. The air was heavy with coming rain, the kind of summer storm that cleanses and renews. "Then help me stand," Eva said softly. "Take me home." They left the Whitmore house that night, Eva leaning on Thaddeus's arm, her few belongings hastily packed by Mum and Delilah, who'd been waiting in the carriage. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore protested, but weakly. Even they could see that their daughter was choosing her husband, choosing the future over the past. As the carriage rolled toward the Ashford mansion through Charleston's gaslit streets, Eva rested her head on Thaddeus's shoulder. "We've been tested," she said quietly, "and we nearly failed." "But we didn't," Thaddeus replied, his arms around her and their unborn child. "Love proved stronger, barely by the thinnest of margins, but it proved stronger." Ahead of them the mansion waited, rooms that had known silence and would now know laughter again. Behind them the Whitmore house faded into shadow, and between them, held in the circle of their arms and the cradle of Eva's body, a child prepared to enter a world where love had been tested and, against all odds, had survived. The pains began at midnight. Eva woke to a sensation like a belt tightening around her middle, gripping and releasing. For a moment, she thought it was indigestion from the late supper Mama Delilah had insisted she eat. Then it came again, harder, and she knew. "Thaddeus," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "It's time." He was awake instantly, lighting the lamp beside their bed. In the warm glow, Eva could see fear and excitement warring on his face. "You're certain?" Another pain answered for her. She gripped his hand, breathing through it. "I'll get Dr. Blackwell," he said, already moving toward the door. And Maman Delilah. Within the hour, the household was transformed into a birthing chamber. Dr. Blackwell arrived with her medical bag and calm authority. Maman Delilah brought fresh linens, hot water, and the kind of steady presence that had brought dozens of babies into the world. The bedroom became a sacred space, lamplight and shadows, the scent of lavender oil, women's voices murmuring encouragement. "You're doing beautifully," Dr. Blackwell said, examining Eva between contractions. "Everything is progressing normally, but it's going to be a while yet. First babies take their time." Thaddeus hovered near the door, useless and terrified. "Mr. Ashford," the doctor said kindly, "perhaps you'd be more comfortable in your study. I'll send word when—" "No." He came to Eva's side, took her hand. "I'm staying." It was scandalous. Husbands didn't attend births, didn't witness the messy reality of childbearing. But Thaddeus had already broken every rule that mattered. One more wouldn't hurt. The night stretched into hours. Eva labored with a courage that awed everyone present. She didn't scream, though they could see the pain etched in every line of her body. She breathed, focused, endured. Thaddeus stayed beside her, offering water, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring words of love and encouragement. When she gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks, he didn't flinch. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her during a brief respite between pains. "You're going to be an extraordinary mother. Tell me that when this is over," Eva gasped. Then another contraction took her. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Blackwell finally said the words they'd been waiting for. "It's time to push. Eva, your son wants to be born." What followed was ancient and primal, a struggle between one life ending and another beginning, between the pain of creation and the joy of completion. Eva pushed with everything she had, drew on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. And then a cry, high, indignant, absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Dr. Blackwell announced, lifting a tiny, red, squalling infant. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Maman Delilah cleaned him quickly, wrapped him in soft linen and placed him in Eva's arms. Elijah. He had dark hair, impossibly small fingers, eyes that struggled to focus. He was perfect in the way only new life can be, full of possibility, unmarked by the world's complications, pure potential wrapped in fragile skin. "Hello, little one," Eva whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "We've been waiting for you." Thaddeus stood frozen, staring at his son with an expression of absolute wonder. When Eva looked up at him, she saw tears on his face too. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked. Carefully, awkwardly, Thaddeus took his son into his arms. Elijah's crying stopped, as if recognizing his father's voice, his scent, some deep genetic knowledge that this person was safe, was home. "Elijah James Ashford," Thaddeus said softly, "I promise you, you'll never know the loneliness I knew. You'll never doubt that you're loved. We're going to do better for you than we had done for us." Dr. Blackwell finished her work, pronounced both mother and child healthy, and began packing her instruments. Maman Delilah bustled about, changing linens, making Eva comfortable, already planning the meals she'd prepare to help the new mother recover. As the sun rose over Charleston, filling the bedroom with golden light, the new family existed in a bubble of peace. Eva, exhausted but radiant, Thaddeus holding his son with the careful reverence one might hold a miracle, and Elijah, brand new to the world, sleeping the profound sleep of those who've just completed the hardest journey. "We made him," Eva said softly, watching her husband with their child. "Out of all the pain and mistakes and fear, we made something perfect." "Not perfect," Thaddeus corrected gently, "but ours. Completely, wonderfully ours." Outside, Charleston woke to another summer day. Church bells rang for morning services. Vendors called their wares in the market. Life continued its endless cycle. But in the Ashford mansion, something new had entered the world. Not just a child, but a family, forged in difficulty, tested by lies, nearly destroyed by fear, but ultimately held together by the simple, stubborn fact of choosing love. Choosing it daily. Choosing it when it was hard. Choosing it even when, especially when, giving up seemed easier. The battles weren't over. There was still justice to pursue, honor to defend, a society to face. But for now, in the soft morning light, there was only this: two people who'd found each other against all odds, and the life they'd created together. The future waited, but it could wait a little longer. The challenge was delivered in the traditional manner, a sealed letter, hand-carried by Thaddeus's second, Judge Montgomery, to Colonel Blackwood's townhouse. "Sir, your actions regarding my wife's character cannot be borne in silence. I demand satisfaction. Name your seconds." Charleston's dueling culture hadn't ended with the war, though it had gone underground, practiced in shadows rather than proclaimed from rooftops. Thaddeus knew the risks. Dueling was technically illegal, could result in criminal charges, but some insults could only be answered with steel. Colonel Blackwood, caught between cowardice and pride, accepted. The terms were set: pistols at 20 paces, Dawn, the Oaks plantation on the Ashley River Road, far enough from town to avoid immediate law enforcement. Eva learned of it when Thaddeus was writing his will. "What are you doing?" she asked, carrying Elijah against her shoulder. The baby was 2 weeks old, already gaining weight, his eyes beginning to focus and recognize his parents. Thaddeus looked up from the document, guilt clear on his face. "Insurance. For what?" "Tomorrow morning I'm meeting Colonel Blackwood to answer for what he tried to do to us." The color drained from Eva's face. "Her duel, for your honor. My honor doesn't require you to die for it." Her voice rose, causing Elijah to fuss. She lowered it, bouncing gently to soothe him. "Thaddeus, this is insanity. We just got our life back. We have a son. You want to risk all of that for some antiquated ritual? I want our son to grow up knowing his mother's name was defended, that when lies were told about her, his father stood up and demanded justice, even if that father isn't alive to raise him." Thaddeus stood, crossed to where she stood. He kissed Elijah's downy head, then Eva's lips gently. "I don't intend to die," he said. "I'm an excellent shot. I'll wound him enough to satisfy honor, and we'll be done. And if he's a better shot than you, then you'll raise our son to know I loved you both more than my own life." She wanted to forbid it, to lock him in their bedroom, to do anything to prevent this masculine idiocy. But she saw in his eyes that this was necessary for him, not just for her honor, but for his own self-respect. He needed to stand against the man who'd tried to destroy their family. "Don't you dare die on me, Thaddeus Ashford," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare leave me alone." "Never again," he promised. Dawn at the Oaks was gray and cool, mist rising from the river like ghosts. Thaddeus arrived with Judge Montgomery and Dr. Pemberton, serving as his seconds. Colonel Blackwood brought his own men, a lawyer and another northern businessman. The weapons were inspected, loaded. The principals took their positions. "Gentlemen," Judge Montgomery said, his voice carrying in the still air, "you have the opportunity to resolve this without bloodshed. Colonel Blackwood, a public apology and financial restitution—" "I'll see him in hell first," Blackwood sneered. "So be it." The judge stepped back. "You will walk 20 paces, turn, and fire. Any man who turns early will be shot down by the seconds." "Understood." Both men nodded. 1. They began walking, backs to each other. 2. Thaddeus's mind was surprisingly clear. He wasn't afraid. Or rather, his fear was for what Eva and Elijah would face if he fell, not for himself. 10. Halfway. The mist swirled around their feet. 15. Almost there. Thaddeus's hand was steady on his pistol. 20. Turn and fire. Both men spun. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Colonel Blackwood's shot went wide. Fear or poor aim, it didn't matter. Thaddeus's shot was precise, calculated. It struck Blackwood's right shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the wet grass. "Honor is satisfied," Judge Montgomery declared. Dr. Pemberton rushed to examine the colonel's wound. "He'll live." The bullet went clean through, missed the bone. Thaddeus walked over to where Blackwood lay, pale and bleeding. "This is what happens when you try to destroy good people," he said quietly. "Consider yourself fortunate I didn't aim for your heart. Now get out of Charleston. Sell your properties, pay your debts, and disappear. If I see you in this city again, honor won't protect you a second time." Blackwood, clutching his wounded shoulder, managed a nod. The news spread through Charleston by afternoon. Thaddeus Ashford had called out a carpetbagger and defended his wife's honor with steel and powder. Society, which had been whispering about Eva for weeks, suddenly found itself confronted with a husband willing to risk death for her reputation. The whispers stopped. As for Miss Cordelia Beaumont, no charges could be brought against her. She'd been too clever, her involvement too indirect. But Charleston society had its own justice. Invitations stopped arriving. Calling cards went unanswered. Her family, humiliated by the association with scandal, sent her to relatives in Atlanta. She left on a rainy morning in late July, and no one came to see her off. At the Ashford mansion, life settled into a new rhythm. Ava recovered her strength, her body slowly returning to its pre-pregnancy state. Elijah grew, changed daily, became the center around which their household revolved. Thaddeus proved an attentive father, surprising even himself. He held his son for hours, walking the halls when the baby fussed, singing lullabies his mother had taught him decades ago. He changed diapers, a task considered beneath aristocratic fathers, and didn't care who knew it. "You're besotted," Eva teased one afternoon, finding him staring at Elijah while the baby slept. "Completely," Thaddeus agreed without shame. "I look at him, and I see everything we survived to get to this moment. Every mistake, every hurt, every time we nearly gave up. It was all worth it for this." They had Elijah baptized in August at St. Michael's Church, where they'd been married. The governor's wife stood as godmother, an honor that confirmed the Ashfords' complete restoration in society's eyes. The ceremony was simple but profound, Elijah's cry of protest when the holy water touched his forehead, making the congregation smile. That evening, back at the mansion, they sat in the nursery watching their son sleep in the mahogany cradle. "We've been through hell together," Eva said softly, "and come out the other side. Do you think it gets easier from here?" Thaddeus considered. "I think we get better at facing it together. We know now that we can survive the worst. That love is more resilient than we thought." Eva reached for his hand, laced their fingers together. "I'm glad I married you. Even when you were insufferable, even when I wanted to strangle you, I'm glad fate brought us together." "Fate," Thaddeus repeated, "or our father's greed. Either way," she smiled, "we made something beautiful out of their calculations." Outside, summer eased toward autumn. Charleston prepared for another social season. Life continued as life does, indifferent to human drama. But in the nursery of the Ashford mansion, two people sat in lamplight, watching their son sleep, knowing they'd weathered storms that would have destroyed weaker bonds. They had been tested by lies, by pride, by fear, and they had survived. Not unscathed. There were scars, certainly, memories that would always ache, but stronger for the testing. Love, they had learned, wasn't the absence of difficulty. It was the choice to stay, to fight, to believe even when belief was the hardest thing in the world, and they had chosen well. December arrived with unexpected warmth, as if Charleston couldn't quite commit to winter. Elijah was 4 months old, beginning to smile deliberately, to track movement with his eyes, to reach for the faces that bent over his cradle. It was in this season of contentment that the past returned. The woman who appeared at the Ashford mansion door was nondescript, middle-aged, modestly dressed, with the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. She gave her name as Mrs. Temperance Whitfield and asked to speak with Mr. Ashford on a matter of utmost urgency. Thaddeus received her in the library, curious and slightly wary. "Mr. Ashford," she began, her hands twisting a handkerchief in her lap, "I hardly know how to begin this, but I have information that you need to hear. Information that concerns your wife and your family. Go on." 24 years ago, in 1844, I was 15 years old and working as a seamstress in Charleston. I was foolish and naive, and I became involved with a man of means. I became pregnant. Thaddeus's interest sharpened. "What does this have to do with my wife?" "Everything." Temperance looked up, her eyes bright with tears. "The child I bore was given to a respectable family to raise as their own. That family was the Whitmores. That child was Evangeline." The world seemed to tilt. "You're saying you're Eva's mother? Her biological mother?" "Yes, and the man who fathered her," she stopped, swallowed hard, "was Cornelius Ashford, your father." The words hung in the air like smoke from a pistol shot. "That's impossible," Thaddeus said, but his voice lacked conviction. His father had always been complicated, capable of deep passion, as evidenced by his love for Thaddeus's mother, capable of seeking comfort elsewhere when grief became too heavy. "It's the truth," Temperance insisted. "Your father paid me to disappear, to never tell anyone. The Whitmores were childless, desperate for an heir. They took the baby, raised her as their own. But she's your half-sister, Mr. Ashford, which makes your marriage," she couldn't finish, "incestuous." The word she couldn't say, the horror that would make their union illegal, immoral. Their son a product of— Thaddeus stood abruptly. "Get out. Mr. Ashford, please, get out of my house, now." She fled, leaving Thaddeus alone with a truth that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. For 3 days he said nothing to Eva. He investigated quietly, desperately seeking any evidence that would prove the woman wrong. He examined old records, questioned his father's former servants, searched through documents. Everything seemed to confirm Temperance's story. Finally, unable to bear the weight alone, he told Eva. They were in their bedroom, Elijah asleep in his cradle between them. Eva listened in growing horror as Thaddeus explained. The woman's visit, her claims, the evidence that seemed to support her. We're siblings. Eva's voice was barely a whisper. Half-siblings, if she's telling the truth. And Elijah... Eva looked at their sleeping son and the color drained from her face. What does this make him? Neither could answer. The implications were too vast, too terrible. The news somehow leaked into Charleston society. Whispers started again, worse than before because this wasn't about forged letters or spurious accusations. This was about bloodlines, about laws both legal and divine. Invitations stopped. Friends turned away. The church questioned the validity of their marriage. Families who'd accepted them now crossed the street to avoid acknowledging them. Eva spoke of entering a convent in Savannah, leaving Elijah with Thaddeus to raise. No, Thaddeus said fiercely, we stay together. Whatever this is, we face it together. But if it's true, even if it's true, I love you. That doesn't change. The law, damn the law, he said. I married you. I chose you. I love you. Nothing changes that. But everything had changed whether they acknowledged it or not. Cornelius Ashford, confronted with the accusation, retreated to his study and wouldn't emerge. His silence felt like confirmation. Then, on a cold evening in early January, a visitor arrived who would change everything one final time. Reverend Amos Pritchard, the Episcopal minister, who'd presided over Cornelius and Margaret's marriage 30 years prior. I have a confession to make, the elderly reverend said, sitting in the Ashfords' parlor. A confession that should have been made long ago. He told them everything. How Temperance Whitfield had come to him in 1844, pregnant and desperate. How she'd fabricated the story about Cornelius being the father in hopes of securing money. How the real father had been a young seminary student named Nathaniel Winslow, who died of yellow fever in 1851, never knowing he had a daughter. I've kept her confession sealed all these years, Reverend Pritchard said, bound by religious confidence. But when I heard the rumors, heard what this lie was doing to your family, he pulled out a letter, yellowed with age. This is Temperance's written confession, signed and witnessed. Your father never touched her, Mr. Ashford. He paid her to disappear because the scandal of an illegitimate child, even one not his own, would have harmed his reputation. But he is not Evangeline's father. The relief was so profound that both Thaddeus and Eva wept. You're certain? Thaddeus managed. As certain as I am of God's grace. The Reverend handed over the document. I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I thought the secret was buried safely. I never imagined it would rise again to harm the innocent. That night, Thaddeus confronted his father one final time. Did you know? He demanded. Did you know she wasn't your daughter? Cornelius looked old, beaten. I suspected. The timing was wrong, the woman's story full of holes. But I used it anyway. Used the threat of scandal to control her family, to facilitate the marriage I wanted for business reasons. You let us believe. Thaddeus couldn't continue. I wanted you to marry the Whitmore girl. When the rumor surfaced that we might be related, I said nothing because it served my purposes to keep you both vulnerable, grateful, dependent. His father's voice was hollow. I became a monster in the pursuit of control. You did. Thaddeus felt no pity. And now you're going to leave. Tonight. You'll remove yourself to the North Carolina property. You'll retain your financial interest in the businesses, but you'll have no role in this family's life. Not mine, not Eva's, and certainly not Elijah's. Thaddeus, this is more mercy than you deserve. Take it or I'll have you removed by force. Cornelius Ashford left that night in a hired carriage, carrying only what he could pack in an hour. He would live another 2 years in isolated comfort before a heart attack claimed him. He would die alone, unmourned by the son he'd driven away. But that was the future. In the present, Eva and Thaddeus held each other in the library where this final nightmare had begun. It's over, Eva whispered. Truly over this time. We're free, Thaddeus agreed. Free of lies, free of manipulation, free to love each other without shadow or shame. The truth had been painful, circuitous, complicated by greed and fear and human weakness. But in the end it had emerged, and it had set them free. The ceremony was Judge Montgomery's idea. You need to publicly renew your vows, he said. Not for yourselves, God knows you're bound tightly enough, but for Charleston. To show society that your marriage is legitimate, blessed, and beyond reproach. So on a clear February morning, St. Michael's Church filled once again with Charleston's old guard. But this time, there was no sense of obligation, no whispers of scandal. This was a celebration of love tested and proven, of truth emerging from lies, of two people who'd chosen each other again and again through every trial. Eva wore a gown of cream silk, simpler than her wedding dress had been, but more beautiful for its simplicity. Thaddeus stood at the altar, watching her walk down the aisle, and his smile was radiant. Reverend Pritchard presided, his old voice strong as he spoke about love's endurance, about faith through trial, about the grace that allows us to begin again. Do you, Thaddeus, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and to cherish in joy and in sorrow, in health and in sickness, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Thaddeus said, his eyes never leaving Eva's face. I choose her every day, for the rest of my life. And do you, Evangeline, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and to honor, in prosperity and in adversity, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Eva said, her voice clear. I choose him freely and completely, now and always. When they kissed, the congregation erupted in applause, improper for an Episcopal service, but no one cared. The reception that followed filled the Ashford mansion with light and laughter. Elijah, held by Mum Delilah, presided over the celebration like a tiny king. Temperance Whitfield was there too, finally able to publicly acknowledge her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she held her grandson for the first time. I'm sorry, she told Eva, for lying, for causing pain, for... You're forgiven, Eva said simply, and you're welcome in our lives if you wish to be. As the celebration continued around them, Eva and Thaddeus slipped away to the garden. The February afternoon was mild, the camellias blooming in defiance of winter. We did it, Eva said softly. What? Survived. Built something real out of something false. Became a family despite everything working against us. Thaddeus pulled her close. We began as strangers forced together by circumstance. We became adversaries who didn't trust each other. Then friends who were afraid to want more. Then lovers who nearly destroyed themselves with fear and pride. He kissed her forehead. And now we're just us, husband and wife who choose each other daily, who know the worst about each other and love anyway. And our son will grow up knowing that, Eva added, knowing that love isn't perfect or easy, but it's worth fighting for. Years later, Elijah would grow tall and strong, educated in progressive schools, heir to a plantation transformed into a cooperative that treated workers with dignity and shared profits fairly. He would be joined by siblings, Charlotte named for the city of their parents' meeting, then Thomas, then little Margaret, who had her grandmother's eyes. The Ashford family would become known throughout South Carolina for their philanthropy, their fair treatment of workers, their quiet revolution in how land and resources could be shared. Eva's school for freedmen's children would expand, eventually becoming an academy that educated hundreds, but all of that was ahead. In the garden that February afternoon, there was only this moment, two people who had married for all the wrong reasons and stayed together for all the right ones. I love you, Thaddeus said. I love you, Eva replied. And in the mansion behind them, Elijah wailed, the imperious cry of an infant who wanted his parents, and they both laughed, heading back toward the sound of their son's voice, toward the life they were building together. They had been tested by contract and conspiracy, by lies and loss, by fear and pride, and every obstacle society and circumstance could construct, and they had survived, not because their love was perfect, but because they chose it. Again and again, through doubt and difficulty, they chose each other. That in the end was the only thing that mattered. That was love.